Sometimes Married with Children builds slowly towards chaos, and sometimes it just starts chaotic and never recovers. This is one of those episodes.
Hey, you! Yeah, you found us. So what are you gonna do about it? Come on, you nose rag. Anytime.
Married with Children has always understood one very important truth. Most disasters begin with pride. In this episode, all it takes is one bad driver, one raised finger, and one deeply anxious investment banker to turn a minor road rage moment into a full-blown suburban crisis. Peggy doesn't care. Al thinks it's hilarious. The kids are ready for violence like it's pay-per-view, but Steve spirals. And that spiral is what drives this episode. Because once a man convinces himself that he's about to fight for his life, there are only two possible outcomes: dignity or humiliation. And in this show, we all know which one is more likely. And so with that in mind, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the 15th episode of the third season of Married with Children, titled The Harder They Fall. Written by Ellen L. Fogel and directed by Jerry Cohen. But let's see how this one stacks up, starting with the episode overview. Now, when the episode starts, it looks like Al is trying to cook, which I was shocked by. It turns out, though, he's really just using a pot on a stove for some reason to collect snacks. He's collecting snacks for a movie that they're going to watch on Betamax. And the kids are complaining about Betamax. And they're just wishing that they could have a VHS player, which, you know, that's just fun. But I suppose it's really only fun for like a certain age, and I'm probably aging myself here.
'Cause he's old.
But I remember when having a great VCR was awesome. I actually remember I had a friend that had a VCR and a rewinder. So when you finish the movie, you'd take it out of the VCR and put it in the rewinder because that would actually rewind it faster. And actually, then you could just go straight to watching another movie while the other one's rewinding. Amazing. At the time, I thought that was maybe not the epitome, but pretty close to the epitome of cool. Either way, Bud is saying there are a lot of good movies out there that they don't get to watch because they're not on Betamax. Like, he's heard there's actually a Godfather Part 2. And then Al's like, if it was any good, it would have come out on beta. Although eventually he does break down and admit that their life stinks. Now, Peggy is going to Milwaukee, which is apparently the closest place to rent beta. And Kelly is upset that her mom gets to cross state lines and she doesn't. But Al's going to give us the reason for this. And it's apparently because last time Kelly crossed state lines, she did so in a van that had a bumper sticker on it that said, "If this van's a rockin', don't come a knockin'." Then we're gonna get the super typical Bud telling Kelly she's a slut joke. When Kelly's like, "Hey, that bumper sticker could be taken a lot of different ways." And Bud goes, "And so can you." I get it. And I think when I was younger, I probably enjoyed that joke more. But now I'm just like, can we move on from this? It's also kind of weird that, like, I don't know, what is he supposed to be, 12, 13 here, is telling his 16-year-old sister that she's a whore or whatever? Just weird. Either way, Peggy's gonna arrive home soon after this. It turns out that Peggy rented some movie called Oh Heavenly Dog. And Al's upset because he wanted Schwarzenegger. Now this is all normal stuff, but then Steve shows up. Now he's gonna come in addressing Al and saying, "I'm mad at your wife." And Al's gonna be like, "Kill her." Wow, Al. But this is where we find out that Steve drove Peggy to Milwaukee. Why? I suppose it doesn't matter because the fact that she's there is what drives the plot into motion. You see, some driver cut Steve off, and while Steve was angry about it, he's more of a live and let live type of guy. The problem was that his passenger isn't. You see, Peggy gave the guy the finger and would have spit on his hood, but Steve had his window rolled up. And when she says all this, Al and the kids cheer. But as Steve points out, before the Neanderthal jamboree really kicks in, the van had a bumper sticker on it that said, "I love San Quentin." The point here is that Steve is terrified that some big ex-con is going to come beat him up. Because we find out that the van actually followed him for a while, and he thinks he lost it, but he's not sure. But we're pretty positive when the van shows up outside the Bundys' house and writes down Steve's license plate number. Now, Steve is terrified when this is happening, but Peggy opens the door and says, "Yeah, you found us. What you gonna do about it, you nose rag?" Who calls somebody a nose rag? "Come on over anytime." Of course, this makes Steve even more scared, but Al is like, "You know, every once in a while, she really makes me proud." Now, Marcy's gonna come over next. She's gonna be like, "Steve, your car smells like chicken, and I went to investigate, and you got 6 pigeons roasting on your radiator." Now, this is going to bring us back to earlier in the episode with Al looking for food for the family, for snacks for the movie, right? Because his interest is piqued. Hot pigeons, you say? And he's going to send Bud out with the tongs to go get them off of Steve's radiator. Then we're going to see what movies the Rhoades rented. And I can't remember which ones exactly. One of them was Predator, and another one was a porno. And Al is lamenting that Peggy didn't rent them anything nearly as good. And Peggy's like, well, those are all VHS. To which Marcy's going to be like, well, of course they're VHS. Only an idiot would own Betamax. And then, just to hammer it home, Peggy's going to respond by saying, or someone who believes a woman's orgasm is brought on by yelling, come on, will ya? Oh, Al. But Steve is jittery. He's going to break his own rule about having the Bundys at the house and invite them over to watch the movies that they rented with them. Of course, the Bundys are going to readily agree, and when we see them at the Rhoades, the Bundys are sitting on the couch in front of the TV, and the Rhoades are sitting on like a dresser or something behind the couch. But the Bundys are going to take full advantage of being at the Rhoades. They take food, Kelly's going to make long-distance phone calls, and Al is going to go take a giant shit. The latter, of course, is the most dangerous. Steve's going to run up after him and try to get the goldfish before Al gets started. But Peggy's like, no, you should leave the goldfish there. It's a good way to tell if the air is toxic or not. She's like, we used to do this with parakeets, but then the parakeets learned how to talk and started screaming for help. But really, we're all just gearing up for Steve to get into a fight with the guy that cut him off. And Marcy is real charged up to see Steve fight someone. But Steve's gonna pull a story out of his ass about how he's refused to fight since he was 10 because he almost beat an 8-year-old to death. And Marcy's gonna be like, good for you, Steve. You know what? You shouldn't break your vow. Steve's like, oh, but I want him so bad. Of course, then he immediately goes up to Al and tells him that it's all bullshit, which it obviously was. And he's gonna ask for advice. Now, what's Al's advice? Well, before we hear that, Al's gonna tell a story. And the story is about when Al was courting Peg. There was a beast that was always there too. Now, it sounds like it's a fellow guy who also wants to date Peg. I mean, the beast showed up everywhere they went. And eventually, Al just knew he'd have to fight him. And according to Al, the fact that he had the fight at all proves that not only is love blind, it's also stupid. Now, when he finally does have the fight, he says, I can't say that I won, and I can't say that I lost. Then he's gonna look at Peg and say that he definitely can't say he won. And she's like looking at him so lovingly when he says that, and I'll just never understand his problem with her. Anyway, what was the identity of this man that Al stood up to? It was Peg's mom. But then he gives Steve his advice. Sucker punch the guy in the bread basket as soon as you open the door. And when the guy actually shows up, everyone's excited to see the fight. But Steve takes Al's advice and punches him in the bread basket as soon as he opens the door. Now, we don't actually see the guy, so we know that there's something wrong. But what was wrong did actually surprise me. The guy he punched, who cut him off in traffic and loves San Quentin, was a little person. I enjoyed that Steve was like, his bread basket was in a different spot than I was expecting. Of course, the Bundys find it hilarious. And apparently the guy was really just coming over to apologize. But none of that matters to Marcy. She wants to bang. She's turned on by him punching some guy, even though it was a little person. So her and Steve run upstairs to go make this happen. And before he gets all the way up, Steve's gonna stop and be like, you guys need to leave now. Now, after he gets up the stairs, Al says, kids, you know what we gotta do. And then they all just basically start looting the Rhoades' house. They take a bunch of food and other stuff, but most importantly, they take the VHS player. Weirdly though, they leave Buck. Now, I don't know if that means that they left Buck or Buck was like, I don't want to go home with them. I don't know what the point of that part was, but it was funny to see that he stayed. But that's the end of the episode. Let's find out how it ranked.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the episode in 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. And this was definitely a weird story. Essentially, Peg seemingly induced the ire of an ex-con and Steve is scared about it. But the ex-con is actually a little person who just wants to apologize. It's such a weird story. I gave it a 2.5. So that brings us to acting. And the acting is decent. The little person was fine, not great or anything. Ed and Katie were great as usual. Christina Applegate was really good. David Faustino was as he typically is. David Garrison and Amanda Bierce were good as well. Not really tearing things up. I think David Garrison probably was better than Amanda Bierce. Anyway, I gave it a 3.25. So that brings us to dialogue. So as goofy as this premise was, it was a lot of fun. I also like that they took their staple jokes and put different twists on them. And what's interesting is at the end, I actually thought I laughed more than I did because of how much fun I was having. So that's worth something. I gave it a 4.25. That gets us to episode coherence. Now there's a few things that don't really make sense in this episode. Like they saw him writing down Steve's license plate number, but they didn't notice his size. And why is Steve driving Peggy to Milwaukee? It just felt like kind of chaos from beginning to end, which definitely has its place, but doesn't make for great coherence. Character-wise, they all cohered pretty well to what the series has been depicting. I gave it a 2.25. So that brings us to character relatability. The bravado of flipping off another driver and not caring about the consequences, especially when said consequences won't come back to you, is definitely relatable. It's also relatable to be afraid of an imagined foe. As silly as this episode was, it was really relatable. So I gave it a 4.5. So that brings us to the laugh counter, and it's been kind of up and down on the rankings here for this episode, so it needs to have a decent laugh counter to keep it in the top 3 tiers, and unfortunately, even though I really did enjoy the episode, it only got me 13 times, which isn't terrible, but it means that the episode got a 29.75, which just barely keeps it out of the top 3 tiers and puts it in mediocre. Now for the series, the average is now at a 33.51, which means it stays in the I'd watch it again. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your scores in the comments. I'd be curious to see what you guys are saying. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Married with Children rankings on this channel or any of my other sitcom or movie ranking episodes. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, you can check out my website at therankpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast. But I will leave you with this. Why did Steve take Al's advice instead of just arguing with the guy?
Why is that?
Well, he was worried he might belittle him.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Sometimes Married with Children builds slowly toward chaos. Sometimes it just starts chaotic and never recovers. This is one of those episodes. Is that the little bit of John that you wanted to sprinkle in here?
You're scaring me. You are scaring me.